In 2015, Vanity Fair declared Kelly Sue DeConnick the future of comic books itself. They said her female-led titles were drawing women back into comics, that diversity was going to be the key to industry growth, and the market was about to explode. Well, it's 2025 now, 10 years later, and comic books are finally starting to recover after all the damage done by Kelly Sue DeConnick and others with their ideas what was going to save mainstream comic books. But comic book stores are still closing at an alarming rate. And even Kelly Sue DeConnick herself noted in 2021 that the state of the comic book industry was abysmal. So what happened? Did the woman that was supposed to save comic books actually break it instead? Today, we're going to examine her 4 biggest predictions on what was going to save the industry and drive it to newer heights than it had ever seen before, and see if any of them actually came true. Spoiler alert, they did not. And the results have been catastrophic for fans like you and me. And look, I'm not here to personally attack Kelly Sue DeConnick, but when the media crowns you as the future of comic books, and your vision becomes the industry standard, we need to hold that vision accountable. Because while the gatekeepers are out there celebrating diversity and feminism in comic books, they forgot about the most important thing, making comic books that people actually want to read. Now let's break down her 4 most controversial predictions and see how they played out in the real world. Prediction number 1, female readers are coming back to comics in droves. The Vanity Fair article made a bold claim. DeConnick has been credited with drawing female readers back to comic books. The article cited that in 2014, females between the ages of 17 and 33 were the fastest growing demographic in comics. They estimated that the market would grow from 700 million to 900 million, largely driven by female audience surge. DeConnick's Captain Marvel was supposed to be the proof of concept, selling 20,000 copies weekly, with 19,000 of them having tattoos of the main character. And this was the big problem in all of this. This was all a mirage. This was all astroturf, driven by a few big personalities that people were drawn to. But when they finally went in there and they supported the comic book, it turns out that they didn't really like comic books, but they did like the art. So yes, you had some cool covers back there. You had some variant covers that were certainly inflating numbers even back in 2015, but they never actually turned into lifelong comic book readers or even monthly comic book readers. And quite frankly, Captain Marvel was a comic book that never actually sustained itself. Yeah, they talk about the Carol Corps and how they had this awesome ground roots campaign of people that just loved Carol Danvers as Captain Marvel. But none of that ever actually played out in real life. There have been over 14 reboots of Captain Marvel just since 2015. That's how little staying power the character of Captain Marvel ever really actually had. In fact, if you look at a lot of the metrics from 2015, with the numbers that we do have until today, the comic book industry essentially remained flat, especially with periodic comic books and American superhero comic books, which is what Kelly Sue DeConnick was supposed to be the future of. In a lot of cases, those are stagnant dollar amounts, which means they're actually selling less units year over year. And in the end, there was female growth in the comic book format, but it wasn't American comic books. It wasn't anything that Kelly Sue DeConnick or any of her friends had anything to do with. It ended up being all on the back of manga. That's actually what drew female readers in and what they continue to read to this day. And the female audience to support Marvel, DC, and the American comic book industry never really materialized in the end. And shockingly, lots of tattoos didn't actually translate into comic book sales in the end. And for some reason, the comic book industry had to learn this the hard way. Prediction number 2, costume changes and realistic characters would expand the audience. DeConnick famously redesigned Captain Marvel's costume, removing the thigh-high boots, the black swimsuit, and opera gloves because she felt they were dated. She said, "The idea that she would be flying around with her ass hanging out is ridiculous." The Vanity Fair article praised this approach, suggesting that making characters more realistic and less male-gazy would bring in new readers who had been turned off by traditional superhero designs. And I think we all remember noticing that when we saw the new version of Carol Danvers as Captain Marvel going, wow, what a really boring costume. Just compare the Captain Marvel design to the classic Wonder Woman design. Which one is more relevant in 2025? 10 years later, after they said, we don't need the male gazy stuff, this isn't what people want, that is still what people want. Those are still the covers that sell. Those are still the toys that people want to buy. And those are still the comic books that people want to read. And in the end, they basically just alienated the entire audience, and people felt like they were being lectured to and condescended by the ass hanging out comments like they weren't good enough or they had bad taste in things, or liking the fact that female superheroes could be sexy and strong at the same time made you a bad person. And guess what? With these stupid, boring, unmemorable designs, new readers never actually showed up for this feminist-friendly redesign on Captain Marvel, and the sales remained pathetic throughout DeConnick's run before she even left. Wonder Woman, Power Girl, Black Widow are popular because of their iconic designs, not in spite of them. They're popular because they're sexy and strong, and that is what draws most people into female superheroes, at least in the American comic book industry. And this very mentality led to countless classic costume changes and redesigns that removed everything that made the characters visually distinctive and amazing to look at. And it failed the very first time, yet because Kelly Sue DeConnick was the future of the industry, everyone thought they should fall in line and make really boring designs on characters that nobody cared about. Prediction number 3, diverse legacy characters would bring in new audiences. The Vanity Fair article celebrated the wave of diversity that DeConnick helped champion. There's even a new all-female Avengers team called the A-Force, plus the new female Thor, who after an initial period of fanboy anguish is outselling the last Thor comic book by 30%. And Spider-Gwen. The article quoted Marvel's Sana Amanat. 10 years ago, if you told me I'd be co-creating a series about a superhero who happened to be a Muslim girl, I'd have choked on my laughter. This was positioned as the future of comic books. Most of these changes were all quietly reversed. Female Thor, Go-Gurt Hulk, Ironheart, all of these diversity replacement characters were eventually undone and removed and replaced with the classic character because they couldn't support sales. It didn't draw anything long-term. And it's hilarious going back and reading this article championing the A-Force as if that was some type of enormous success. It never sold. It never sold from the beginning. Did it even make it to 20 issues in total? I don't believe it did. And herein lies the problem with all this. These characters and these ideas were greenlit and done to check boxes, not because they had really compelling stories to tell or big grand ideas that they wanted to execute long-term. So everything ended up being short-term games at the expense of actual readers. All of these ideas alienated lifelong fans and drove them away because they had decades invested in these characters and they were all summarily wiped clean basically at the exact same time. Prediction 4, feminist storytelling would make comics more relevant. DeConnick didn't hold back about her feminist agenda. She created Bitch Planet as a direct response to criticism of her Captain Marvel direction, saying, I had the gall to have intergenerational female friendships and a largely female cast. And you know, every once in a while, a joke. It ruffled feathers, and I thought, well, if that's what we're going to talk about, then let's talk about it. The Vanity Fair article positioned this as comics becoming more culturally relevant and tackling real-world issues. Bitch Planet was a complete commercial failure, bitch. Are you kidding me? The book sold like crap, was delayed half the time, and didn't have good, compelling storytelling. People wanted to read stories, not be lectured to. And this was the introduction of a trope that is still killing comic books today. Female comic books cannot be about superheroes anymore. They have to be about intergenerational female friendships, and it's all about validation. Never about overcome the odds or doing something amazing. It's all about them talking their feelings out. It's boring. It's all about them eating at tables. And it's all because of Kelly Sue DeConnick and her idea of, hey, I'm getting pushback on what I'm doing with Captain Marvel. It's not exactly successful. They don't like my feminist agenda in the comic book. I'm going to push harder and make it bigger, and I'll just make an entire comic book dedicated to that, was the exact wrong answer, and so many creators decided to follow her lead. This approach actually became the template for Marvel and DC Comics for years. Messaging first, stories second, comic books. And that's not even to mention the fact that the feminist agenda doesn't really get over all around the world. This certainly alienates a lot of the audience in Asia, the biggest market in the entire world. This alienates people across Europe. This alienates people across South America. In the end, hurting American comic book sales in key global markets, setting us back even further. Before we wrap this up, I do want to ask you one question. Are you tired of watching the comic book industry make the same mistakes? Do you want to support honest, no BS commentary that calls out these failures? Then please consider supporting Think Critical on Patreon. There's a link in the video description. We need all the help we can get fighting against the corporate narrative. So that is the story. Kelly Sue DeConnick's 4 biggest claims about the future of the comic book industry Not a single one of them ever came true. They all failed spectacularly. Women did not flock to American superhero comic books. They went to manga. Costume changes didn't expand the audience, they alienated the fans. Diverse legacy characters did not bring in new readers, it only drove out old readers. And feminist storytelling did not make comic books more relevant, it made them more preachy and boring. And the tragedy in all of this, Kelly Sue DeConnick herself in 2021 admitted that the state of the comic book industry was absolutely abysmal, with stores closing and sales plummeting. She helped create the very disaster that she was lamenting in 2021. Thankfully, things are starting to turn around. And what did she tell fans when they pushed back or complained about her storytelling? Don't buy my books. Well, congratulations, Kelly. Nobody bought your books. This is what happens when you let activists, rather than actual fans, determine the creative direction of your publishing line. When you prioritize messaging over stories, when you chase phantom fake audiences that never arrive while insulting your core lifelong comic book fans in the process. The comic book industry is coming back from the brink of death, and the people who promised to save it are the ones that almost killed it in the end. If you want to see more videos exposing people that said they were going to be the savior of the comic book industry, but in the end did a lot to actually break the industry, then you need to watch my breakdown of Gail Simone next. She's another writer that promised to make comic books better, but in the end only made things much, much worse. Click the link on the screen or in the video description, and trust me, if this video pissed you off, that one's probably going to piss you off even worse.